So our project is called CoCreativeSpaces. The project follows 4 musicians. Bernt Isak Werstad on guitar and electronics, Morten Kvenir on piano and electronics, Lavdi Omes on vocals and urutu. Urutu is a Kenyan string instrument, and Gyri Kalvestad on vocals and electronics. And the project followed these musicians through a 6-month-long co-creative process, which ended in a concert and in May of this year. The basic idea was to include artificially intelligent agents as proactive partners in an iterative music making process, whereby accumulated recordings of the musicians improvising together are used as data to train musical agents that participate in subsequent improvisations. As the project proceeded, the musical agents, or bots as we call them, were informed by growing corpora of past interactions. We experimented with improvising in different constellations of human-machine interactions. So this project has been supported by Arts Council Norway. We are working on a chapter in a forthcoming publication by the Arts Council, and the title of the publication is Creative Practices in Music, which will be published in next year. It's a dual track project. It's both an artistic research project aimed at uncovering what kind of new music can be made with this process. And it's also an academic research project with a view on how musicians' attitudes can change when interacting with non-human agencies over time. So in this presentation, we argue that reimagining the present is a parallel exercise to rethinking the history of technology-based music. Hopefully our project, although not particularly historically oriented, can give some useful perspectives that may be relevant to the topic of this conference. As an aside, Andrew Knight-Hill made a good point in his presentation on Thursday that the term technology-based makes some assumptions about electronic and digital technology being something qualitatively different to earlier technologies. And similarly, one can make the claim that AI and machine learning is something completely new that will revolutionize music in years to come. Toward the end of this presentation, we'll circle back to this claim and question whether such assumptions are qualified. The research questions we have posed is what happens to musical co-creation when artificial intelligence is included in the creative cycle? What kind of cultural biases are inscribed into the technology? And how can intercultural musical collaboration identify such biases, and how may they be attenuated? The musicians, as I explained, they create music by recording improvised sessions and then playing together with trained bots based on these recordings. Subsequently, they perform, the interaction constitutes a meeting between the human and the machine agent's worldviews. The machines do not take over, they co-create. Just a technical aside, the output of these musical agents are basically fragments of earlier recordings put together in new ways. And here, before we go further into the theory heavy stuff, I'm going to play an excerpt from the final concert that we did in May, just so you have an impression of what it sounds like.
start night.
And so the tool that we used is we call it the Co-Creative Communication Platform, CCCP. It's based on the principle of concatenative synthesis using fragments of earlier recordings by the musicians. And it also uses the factor oracle sequence modeling technique to simulate the playing style of the musicians. It's designed to have 3 different interactive behaviors. One behavior is called shadowing. The musical agent tries to follow the input closely. Mirroring. The musical agent listens to longer phrases and mirrors back interpretations or variations of these phrases. And coupling, the musical agent engages in a more egoistic behavior following its own internal routines, but based on material in the harmonic spectral vicinity of the input. So I'm not going to go into further detail about this, but for more reading, my PhD, which is forthcoming, and a paper at NIME last year explains this in more depth. So basically, the user negotiates with these behaviors and doesn't really control them directly. We have we've written something about the view of creativity and how it's changed historically. So the project is rooted in the notion that creativity is something that happens in relations, not isolated within people, but between people and their environments. And these are what we call the co-creative spaces, where ideas emerge as an effect of interaction. So in ancient Greece, there was a completely different view of creativity. It came from the outside and it was bestowed upon people by the muses. And in the European Middle Ages, the muses were replaced by a Christian god who gifted certain people with divine inspiration. An ontological shift happened with the turn to individualism during the Enlightenment, when the giftedness of creativity came to be viewed as coming from a special kind of individual. And that's where we have the idea of the notion of the creative genius comes from this period. And finally, we have in the past few decades, the view of creativity as an individual capacity has been challenged by the view that creativity is something that happens in interactions between agents, as well as in relation to the wider sociocultural context that the agents act within. So what we call co-creativity is something in between fields. The human-computer interaction fields work with creativity support tools, which pose the question, how can computers aid human creativity? And on the AI side, you have computational creativity, which poses the question, how can we make computers appear creative? And co-creativity draws from both these fields. And what we want to know is, how can we make humans and computers collaborate creatively? So Deterting et al., they say that the computational agent is seen as a collaborator as opposed to a tool or creator. The human computational agents are placed in a tight interactive loop where each has the capacity to modify the behavior of the other. So the structure of the project is that we had 2 workshops, one in December 2021 at the outset of the project, and one in May 2022 before the project finale, culminating in 2 concerts. Each workshop lasted for 5 days, and we recorded improvisations, as mentioned, trained bots based on these recordings. And we had focus groups each day, a total of 10 focus groups lasting 20 to 40 minutes each. And these have just recently been transcribed, and we're actually in the middle of analyzing it now. So what we present here are, as mentioned, preliminary findings. So for the first workshop in December, we focused more on recording and improvising, and then we started introducing some musical agents based on the recordings from the first few days. There was a breakthrough on day 4 where suddenly something happened, like there was a dialogue going on instead of just playing around. And it was discovered that if the musicians played less, listened more, and they discovered the creative agency of the musical agents. And this set the stage for subsequent development and the format for the second workshop. The data was analyzed using discourse analysis, with a focus on how language conveys the musician's attitude to the development of a collaborative work, where technology is considered a co-creative actor. So the second workshop in May, we did some more improvising and recording, and we introduced new agents based on accumulated recordings that were gradually, because this is an iterative process, the agents were more and more informed by previous material. The focus groups uncovered cultural biases in the software. For example, we discovered there was an outnumbering of the Kenyan influence of the group. So we edited the software and also made dramaturgical adaptations to the performance. For example, we had more improvisations where Labdi, the Kenyan person in the group, led off the improvisations, and the task was to follow her. So what we discovered also is that free improvisation is not so free, because there's a lot of unwritten rules in this. And also Labdi was not very familiar with free improv. So that was also a cultural barrier that we worked with overcoming. This finding could be tied to Benson's concept of an other, that musical dialogue only occurs when each partner both holds the other in tension, that is, holds the other accountable and feels the tension of accountability exerted by the other. Whereas technologies historically have been viewed as tools for human creativity, this newer perspective puts an onus on the human participants to accept an encounter with technology that, in Gadamer's words, breaks into my ego-centeredness and gives me something to understand. So finally, in the abstract that we submitted, there are some big words. CoCreativeSpaces aims to shed light on impending forms of music making that are only just emerging, but which by all accounts will make an impact on future music cultures, artistically, economically, socially, and politically. And we also write, we believe this view is more coherent with a pre-colonial, pre-institutional past, and also a better fit for the current and future development in music making. So this kind of language needs careful and prolonged deliberation. Sorry, I'm just referring to my notes, which is on another screen. Yeah, it is probably naive and quite arrogant to believe that one research project can provide answers to issues related to the statements such as the ones provided here. We think this is a discourse that requires continuous input and sustained deliberation. As such, CoCreativeSpaces is a small contribution, but we intend to continue the project after the chapter has been published. We sincerely do believe that machine learning and artificial intelligence can open up for new ways of making music that potentially can give voices to wider communities. However, this requires an awareness of the power of the data being used to train the AI, and it requires sustained contributions from adequately diverse populations of users. So an open question to round this off is, are we falling into the same trap? I mean, the whole structure of this project being financed by the Arts Council, it already puts up a framework of, which, I mean, it could have exclusive function. So are we really rethinking history? Are we reimagining the present, or are we merely witnessing history repeat itself?